Hey, this is Sydney, and I am here to talk us through the Astro weather of September 24th through the 30th, 2025. If you are seeing this introduction, you are on YouTube, and I would really appreciate you interacting with my channel with a like, a subscribe, a comment. Everything helps. I'm always trying to grow. I do have a cute little client base, but I would always like to meet more clients out there in the world. So I think that's kind of the basic housekeeping of all things. Oh, yeah. So I do my forecast for Wednesday through Tuesday. It's because that I always record on Tuesdays, the day before the forecast comes out. It's just what my recording schedule allows for. And I will be posting charts on the screens for the YouTube videos only of the day that I am talking about. It will be in 0 Aries, just so we can orient ourselves in the chart. And it'll always be for about 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, unless I say it's for a very specific time, which I will also post on the screen. I usually chop these videos up, so if you kind of want a little bit of a shorter form content, even though longer form content is really good for your brain, in a bite-sized kind of world right now, I put those things on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook as the current algorithms will allow. All right, so without further ado, let's kind of get into the rundown. So let's orient ourselves in time and space. Let's orient ourselves in tune or in terms of what the bigger, slower planets are doing, because when the smaller planets or the quicker planets come and activate those things, that's kind of when we get to see some of the action, right? So we still have Pluto, Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus. They're all retrograde. They're going to remain retrograde for a number of months longer. So we know that even though collectively I think we're all trying to go forward and hopefully into a future that is better for all of us, we have some cleaning up to do. These outer planets often have to do with like culture and society and how we're all kind of relating to each other on a bigger way, not in a personal way. And them all being retrograde says that like we have some cleaning up to do. And also that they're all happening in either right now, the planets are in the very first degrees of a sign, retrograding back across the sign border into the very end degrees of the previous, really talks about endings and beginnings as well. So there's that. We know that we're kind of in this weird liminal space of watching things crumble and new things begin, but did those new things really matter? Do we got to go and like reconfigure them? Yes, we do. That sort of thing, right? So we already have that going on. We just had the eclipse on Sunday, and that would have been Sunday the 21st. And that was a really powerful eclipse. It involves Saturn. It was at the very last degree of Virgo. There could be a lot of things having to do with merchants and workers being kind of held back, restricted. We know that this eclipse brought stuff with the Jimmy Kimmel, people who speak Virgo, Mercury, right? Being silenced, Saturn putting a stop and a halt to. I think it's very interesting that, then there was boycotts, right? People taking action, Pluto and Aquarius, power to the people, taking these sorts of actions. That means that this week he's back on the air, and in fact already took to TikTok in his own way as well. But that isn't, I'm not here to talk about Kimmel today. I want to talk about Mars. I want to talk about Mars because I think Mars is the biggest player of this week, and we are in for a very martial week. Mars just entered Scorpio on Monday, September 22nd. So when Mars entered Scorpio, he entered the sign of domicile. He entered a sign where he's particularly strong in, particularly happy in. And I believe that as soon as, whenever he enters Scorpio, those first degrees, he's even more strong because he's in his own bound. He's doing great. She is feeling herself, right? Mars in Scorpio. Let's talk about the planet Mars. Mars is a planet of action, of will, desire, aggression, anger, rage, violence. We need Mars because Mars gets things done, right? Without Mars, we're not doing things, right? It's action oriented. He cuts and severs. He is known as a malefic, right? He's the lesser malefic. He's faster than Saturn being the greater malefic. So we just need to know that he's considered a more challenging planet. Wherever Mars is in your chart, you know that there's probably going to be some sort of issue or struggle. If you could hear my dog snoring in the background, just know that he's snoring really cutely, and I'm really sorry I can't wake him up and he won't leave my side. So I'm just letting you know that right now. He's like my little shadow. So if I were to get up and go right now, he would wake right up and go with me. So I can't really put him anywhere else. Okay, so back to Mars. The places that Mars rules in your chart usually has some sort of strife or difficulty. The places where Saturn rules the chart is usually where there's some sort of delay or block or denial, right? Or a slow growth could be. Now, if you have a day chart, Mars is going to be a little bit more difficult. For night chart, Saturn more difficult. All that being said is Mars is considered a malefic. So there's a challenge here. But we need our malefics, Mars and Saturn, to be in signs that they're cozy and comfortable acting in so they don't act out of pocket. So where we had a lot of shenanigans, so many shenanigans with Mars being in Libra, the sign where he's in its detriment, right? Now we have Mars in a sign that he loves. He's feeling himself. So we like that. We hope that in the ways that we are getting things done now is taking a more laser-like focus and approach. Maybe it's a bit more deliberate because it's in a fixed sign. It's in Scorpio. Maybe it's, a little bit more slowly, deliberately, but also in this very, just think so focused, steadfast sort of way. There can be some manipulation, some aggression, all of that stuff too, but we want our malefics acting in dignity, right? we want them acting good and not necessarily acting, out of pocket where, doesn't have all the resources, needs to act. So Mars entering Scorpio, kind of the first thing it does is it laces up its boots and says, I'm going to go toe to toe. I'm going to square up. Actually, is probably the more appropriate thing to say. I'm going to square up with Pluto. And this aspect has been forming since the eclipse, since right before the eclipse. And this aspect is not going to really release its grips for the rest of the week. So this is why I say this is a Martial week, and we need to be aware that there is a lot of really interesting kind of sus energy in the sky, because Mars-Pluto contacts usually have to do with violence, unfortunately. A really beautiful way to use Mars-Pluto contacts in any sort of chart is to, go out there, use your body, take action, constructive action that isn't violence. It's like channeling those aggressive feelings into something, whether it's kicking a ball or, building something, using your hands to get, This is more psychological, I think, as well. This is psychological warfare, that Mars in Scorpio, because Scorpio is in a psychological sign, and we have Pluto in Aquarius, which is in kind of a cerebral air kind of moment as well. So I don't necessarily know if this is going to be as physical, but it could be. It's still fixed, right? Mars' cycle is about 2 years. A very pertinent thing to know is that this Mars-Pluto square is a third quarter square, which is also known as the crisis of consciousness, which makes sense. This is like a psychological square around things that piss us off, that make us very angry and we want to take action on. So in all of the ways that we might be hoping that people will kind of literally square up to larger institutions in order to, have it take care of its people instead of maybe putting money in its own coffers. We should also know that these cycles, the squares, the oppositions, and the conjunctions usually are times that we can go back in history and kind of look and see what the flavor is. So the last time we had a third quarter square was on October 8th, 2023. That's just 2 days after, so it perfected on the 8th of 2023. And there was a very significant event that happened on October 6th, 2023, which is very much tied into what is happening now in this world, unfortunately. So there could be some sort of echo or rhyme with events that happen that trigger this particularly violent cycle. The last third quarter square was in air and earth, and this one is in water and air. I'm very interested to see how we are all grappling with the influx of that Pluto, Uranus, and also just Uranus and Gemini. Like, our information is rapidly shifting and changing in ways that we could have never imagined. We are currently seeing a mass psychosis and hysteria around the rapture. And I think that this is due to Mars being at the apex of a yod that has to do with Saturn and Neptune and Uranus. And that yod was also in action during the last third quarter square that we had on October 8th, 2023. And we can say that a lot of the actions that these Marses have taken have been due to religion. The desire for a lot of folks to escape right now is extremely strong because of the Mars quincunx Neptune moment, and also the quincunx Uranus. It's wanting to suddenly break free, a desire to suddenly break free or to act erratically. And I think this is it's very spicy because we have that quincunx to Uranus from Mars. So all that being said, we need to be careful, and we need to keep our wits about us. We need to be very, very careful about how we spend our energy and our anger, how we express that, how we exercise it. I think that's all I want to say right now. We're going to get into the energies of the week. Wednesday, September 24th is Mercury's day. We have Mercury in Libra, not a sign that he is necessarily at home in, but certainly a sign where there's a bit of conversation, communication, still in a sign of communication, right? It's more of like a relating, thinking about both sides, that sort of thing. Still under the beams, so maybe we're not thinking as carefully as we could. Maybe we're being a little bit too reliant on other people's opinions instead of maybe thinking for ourselves, because we're thinking about other people, or maybe thinking about what other people are thinking about us because of the Mercury and Libra sort of situation. But nevertheless, Mercury's day. Now, today on September 24th, we do have that kite in full effect. The kite that was more or less triggered for the eclipse, the full, the new moon eclipse. The solar eclipse on the 21st is again kind of being triggered here with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction opposing the sun, and Pluto and Uranus being in trine, and those planets being in sextile with Saturn and Neptune. So we're still, it kind of just says to me, we're still very much in eclipse season. Things are changing, making themselves known. And in some ways, I think that this kite has to do with all of the kind of rapture stuff. People are like, Calgon, take me away. I want to get out of here, right? There's an escapism sort of thing happening here with the Sun, Neptune opposition. There's like an illusion, a delusion, certainly a grand delusion around like what would be, it would be so beautiful to get out of here. We have Mars also at the apex of a yod, with Uranus and Saturn, Neptune sitting at the base of that yod. So we know that there's some sort of very pivotal, there's like a point, not to put too fine a point on it, which would be very much a Mars and Scorpio, the pinhead, the laser beam. Mars is kind of powered up and needing to take some sort of action as well. Now, Mars in Scorpio quincunx retrograde Uranus in Gemini, and we have to remember these are a little bit slower planets, right? The moon changes and, where it is in a couple hours time, so the aspect can go by. But this Mars quincunx retrograde Uranus, which is one part of this yod, is going to hold for just a couple of days. And so we know that there could be some very like sudden erratic outbursts of anger, some change, some freneticness. And I tend to think of this kind of configuration having to do with like earthquakes, right? Like physically being shaken up in some sort of way. And certainly we actually had an earthquake in California right when Mars was ingressing into Scorpio, which I just thought was so fascinating. Anyways, the moon is going to enter Scorpio at 2:00 a.m. Now we have the moon in the sign of his fall. He's not happy in Scorpio. It's very much a psychological moon. It's churning, it's thinking, or it's not really thinking. It's like processing things on like a molecular level, but not necessarily outwardly, right? Scorpio is a yin feminine sign that kind of tends to hold and repress and bottle up. And a moon in Scorpio can be a bit obsessive, a bit compulsive, and a bit manipulative as well when it's not feeling super great. And so we know that with the moon entering Scorpio, coming and triggering that Mars, right? That Mars that's in Scorpio at the apex of the yod, we can kind of expect some very moon martial things to be happening, some angry outbursts, some angry or very psychologically deep emotions being expressed in some sort of way. The moon is going to set off the Mars-Pluto square that we're going to have as well. It's almost as if it gives us a little bit of like a bing, hey, it's real, it's happening. The Mars-Pluto square happens today at 4:51 a.m. Retrograde Pluto in Aquarius, pardon me. And so we know that Mars-Pluto contacts often have to do with anger or aggression. We know that the squares usually can often do with violence. And a good way to use this energy is to kind of exert your physical, whatever the pent up stuff that you got going on. I think it's particularly pent up because Mars in Scorpio is in a yin sign. It kind of holds, it's fixed, it holds on to its things. That's why it can get so obsessive and like very laser like and very like deliberate. It's very much like a sniper kind of energy, that Mars in Scorpio, especially in the first degrees of its sign. So we need to be really careful about how we use our energy, how we use our anger, how we take action, right? This could be a particularly explosive time because Mars is also making that contact with Uranus by quincunx, Saturn and Neptune by quincunx as well. So Mars is having to make some sort of adjustment, right? There's a psychological adjustment, there's also a physical adjustment. And because of the quincunxes to Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus, but also that square to Pluto is a forceful change. So it's volatile, and these things kind of hold on for the whole week. So don't think just because it's not Wednesday anymore when I'm done talking about this day and I go on to the next day that this energy is just somehow dissipated. It's not. We just need to know that this week is very Martian. We do get at 3:17 p.m., we're going to get the moon sextile Venus in Virgo, which is a really lovely kind of active working energy. My dog is snoring so loud, it's crazy. And then we get this dreamy sort of energy that's happening at 3:30 p.m. with the moon by quintile retrograde Neptune. The interesting thing about that is that they're engirdled, by Mars wanting to, take some sort of very deliberate action to get something done. So it maybe is something it has to do about the dream. This day is rough. Like, let's just be clear. There's not a lot helping it out except for that sextile to Venus in Virgo, the moon sextile Venus in Virgo in the afternoon. We have a lot of really interesting energy that says that we're having to make some sort of, psychological shifts and changes and adjustments, maybe even physical adjustments. And we have that Pluto-Mars square, which is perfect today, and will kind of set the tone, I think, for the rest of the week. Thursday, September 25th is Jupiter's day. We have Jupiter in Cancer. He is still pretty happy as a clam, not making any major aspects, Ptolemaic aspects, but we need to remember that Jupiter is now kind of casting a sign-based trine over Mars and also the moon. Today, the moon, but Mars in general. So hopefully that's a kind of tempering down and soothing of the anger and the really strong, powerful feelings and desires that we're having, that there's some sort of calming moment that is kind of happening there. Now, today, there's not a lot of major aspects that the moon is making, so I think that we are going to kind of stay inside of that cranky, strange, anxious, angry energy that we had of Wednesday. We do have the moon in Scorpio, sesqui-square, retrograde Saturn in Pisces. That is a really challenging psychological sesqui-square. It's a square and a half, right? It feels like a frustration. You maybe can't really get all of the things done or know that you're going to be able to move forward. You kind of feel like you've hit a wall, but you've hit a wall and you keep hitting a wall and keep hitting a wall, and it kind of keeps compounding inside of oneself. So it's not really the best energy to wake up with, certainly. We are going to get Venus by quintile retrograde Pluto at 7:39 a.m. It's kind of an interesting energy because I do think that there is Venus in Virgo is not necessarily happy in Virgo, though I do love a Venus in Virgo because it's very, very precise and perfecting, analytical, and being in that biquintile with Pluto in Aquarius, which is, Pluto is the transformative, change, obsession. There's a depth, there's a power to it. I think it's almost like Venus has the ability to really get to the essence of perfection or beauty, and it's kind of perfect in a more there's just a depth there, and even in being able to make art, I think that's we get a psychological moment and also a beauty moment that is almost ethereal or different. I like the contact. I think there's a little bit of an obsessive thing to it, but certainly not necessarily in a bad way. I don't think I like Pluto. So there we go with that. We're going to get the moon sesqui square retrograde Neptune in Aries. I think this feels like a confusion and delusionment that we can't really quite get to the bottom of. Psychologically feeling confused, and that's kind of an interesting little moment, considering that we know that a lot of people thought that the rapture is happening. I do think that there's this like disillusionment and letdown, right? We didn't get to go, and what do we do about that? We get moon quintile retrograde Pluto, 5:13 p.m. This is kind of like being able to psychologically and emotionally get to the bottom of things, or to feel a little bit deeper without it being scary or without it being super challenging. It's just kind of we're there. I think it's like goth mode. And that's kind of how I look at the moon quintile retrograde Pluto. And then there's a pleasant aspect of Moon and Venus in Virgo going to be quintile as well. And I think that there's just, a soothing, kind of caring moment here. Venus in Virgo can be very caring, right? It can be very nurturing. It can be very healing. And so I think that there's something there about that. And then the only Ptolemaic aspect that we have for the day is we're going to have that Moon in Scorpio trine Jupiter in Cancer at 10:06 p.m. So all day this trine is essentially forming, and when we have moon Jupiter contacts that are in a harmonious contact, it usually brings a little bit of soothing, a little bit of maybe calm, flow, psychological flow, and I think that's really helpful considering the energies of yesterday and also earlier in the day. There is always, as always, like an indulgence factor here. And maybe it's an indulgence factor in all of the things that make you feel really safe and secure and emotionally safe and secure, right? Like a moon in Scorpio really wants to kind of climb inside of a person's, like the person that they want, like skin, and like be with them. And Cancer has that like super protective, Jupiter in Cancer, super protective homeland, like security. This feels like security. Scorpio and Cancer are signs of security. Cancer is a cardinal sign. It wants to take action. Scorpio is a fixed sign. It wants to kind of hold on to things and retain. And so there's almost like it feels like a container of water that, for better or worse, maybe isn't the healthiest thing, but it's mine and I feel good about it. And so there's kind of a pleasantness that comes in later in the evening. And so, try to utilize that energy to kind of comfort, like do a little comfort fall into bed and wrap yourself in your favorite sheets and, feel all of the feelings. It also feels a little bit like crying as well, or release, some sort of like psychological, emotional sort of release with the moon in Scorpio trine Jupiter in Cancer later in the evening. Friday, September 26th is Venus's day. We have Venus in Virgo, the sign of her fall. Not super happy there, but you know what? It is a Venus that is very resourceful and able to make things nearly perfect, right? Venus is in a critical communication sign, definitely a little bit more internal. So there could be a lot of maybe conversations that we're having with ourselves around beauty and harmony and value, even money. We have Venus and Mercury are in a mutual reception, right? So Venus in Virgo ruled by Mercury and Libra ruled by Venus and Virgo. So there's kind of like a circuit here. And so hopefully, the conversations that we're having about, what things are worth and our value and our place and how we're connecting with people are constructive. Yeah, I like that. So today I think is definitely a little bit more, we can get a little bit more done, right? We're able to kind of work on some things, move through. We have the moon making some good Ptolemaic aspects, so there's a bit more flow happening, a lot of aspects, so we're just getting through the day. We do wake up feeling a little bit sensitive, so we want to be a little bit careful about that. And I say that because 6:08 a.m. we get the moon quincunx retrograde Chiron in Aries, and this could feel kind of sensitive and like anxious about that sensitivity. Certainly because of the quincunx brings a kind of like, oh, I can't really put my finger on it, but it doesn't feel quite great. 10:44 a.m. we're going to get the moon trine retrograde Saturn in Pisces. This is a great aspect for just kind of getting things done. Now, the void, of course, is going to begin at that time, and it's going to be void for a couple of hours. So let's just like keep wrapping up the things on our to-do list, and maybe the things we're trying to wrap up before the end of the week, since this is kind of the end of the work week for a lot of people. We get this really lovely Sun Jupiter quintile 11:30. I think this is really pleasant. When I think about Sun quintile Jupiter, like the creativity, like feeling generous and expansive, right? And I like that, and wanting to kind of take action with that. The Sun and Jupiter in cardinal signs, so they're very kind of initiatory. I like that quintile. It feels good. It's going to hold for just a little bit, like for the rest of the day. So let's roll with it. We're going to get a moon in Scorpio semi-square, Mercury in Libra. I think this is just kind of like, be a little bit careful about the things that you say to other people, especially things that you are trying to kind of figure out on your own, and like maybe you're trying to relate to other people about the things you think. It's just, there's something not quite right, and so let's maybe just be a little bit careful. At 2:37 p.m. the mood lightens because the moon changes signs. We always, at least I always feel kind of a lift or like a takeoff moment after the moon leaves Scorpio and goes into Sag. Sag is like, I'm getting out of here. I need to go explore. I need to go philosophize. I need to like learn. I need to just kind of broaden my horizons. And like other fire signs, there's a little bit of escapism. Like I gotta go. Like I gotta get out of here. And that's when the void, of course, is going to end. So I'm hoping that the mood lightens and we're kind of all like, okay, we just went through a lot emotionally and psychologically over the last couple of days with the moon in Scorpio, and then obviously that Mars square Pluto situation that's still kind of, happening, still very much an orb. So hopefully the moon in Sag just goes like, okay, like a little bit of like a takeoff moment. We're going to get the moon trine retrograde Neptune in Aries. That's going to happen at 3:57 p.m. This is like very dreamy and intuitive and creative. This is like engaging with like art and film and, I don't know, like envisioning a brighter, better future. It's a really lovely trine. We like moon trine Neptune. There's a little bit of like an escapism thing or a really embracing the illusion, sinking into the illusion of things. So we need to be a little bit cautious of that. But for all intensive sakes, it really says like intuition is really at play at this moment. At 5:13 p.m., we're going to get the moon opposite retrograde Uranus in Gemini. This is surprising. There's something surprising, right? This is emotionally surprising, suddenly changing something about how we feel or habit. Certainly, some sort of shakeup with the moon in Sag and Uranus in Gemini. This has to do with thinking, and this has to do with belief. Maybe we emotionally like realize something that shakes us, and we have to kind of shift some way of thinking or believing about something that is just overall just surprising, right? It's a shock. We're going to get the moon sextile retrograde Pluto in Aquarius. Again, moon Pluto in harmonious retrograde Pluto in Aquarius, the harmonious contacts really allow us to go deep in ways that isn't necessarily terrifying, but it is, going into the depths of the dark places, and the ability to do so easily. The sextile has the kind of nature of Venus, and so there's like a harmony here. It's like, even though the moon isn't a sign that's like, I gotta go, I gotta get out of here. Maybe this is a little bit more of a philosophical moon than it even is in just when it's by itself in Moon and Sag. It's touching Pluto and Aquarius with that sextile. And so it's like maybe it's thinking about, all of the ways that it kind of feels like if I'm going to be free, we should all be free. And what does that mean? Loud neighborhood. 6:15 p.m. we get a healing by quintile from the moon to retrograde Chiron. It feels intuitive, kind of spiritual. We got those fire signs all about intuition, a spark, a light. And then at 11:34 p.m., last aspect of the day, we get the moon in Sagittarius, sextile the sun in Libra. This feels kind of playful. This is a really lovely ending aspect for the working week, certainly. And I think that come Friday afternoon, there's a vibe shift and it is very real. And hopefully to all of our benefit that, maybe we can laugh about something. Maybe we can there's like a sort of, that sudden release with the opposition to Uranus and Gemini that's like, okay, whew, gotta let that go, gotta let that flow. And then we get that really lovely moon in Sag sextile sun in Libra. It's like how we're feeling and how we're being, how we be. Our creative identity and purpose is in alignment with how we're feeling free, feeling social, feeling playful, all of that. So come Friday afternoon, hopefully we're seeing our way out of the dark. Saturday, September 27th is Saturn's Day. Saturn is still retrograde in Pisces, cleaning up some old stuff around, structures and social situations. There's things about government. There's definitely, when Saturn's in Pisces, stuff around water and maritime things. Saturn wants us to find the limit. It is the limit. It is the border. And Saturn wants us to get to work, right? Where Saturn is in our chart tells us where there is maybe some sort of delay or challenge or block, is some sort of lesson, right? And right now we're having lessons of a Pisces flavor, which can be around compassion, certainly. And also Saturn's day can be a really good day to remember, to do your tasks. And I get it, it's the weekend, but I always like doing my chores on a Saturday because it's Saturn's day, get to work. And then on Sunday, I get to play because it's the sun's day, right? So September 27th, Saturn's day, I think that this is kind of like I think it's a bit cranky. Honestly, I think it's a bit cranky, and I think it's like psychologically cranky where you're just really trying to get to the bottom of it. It's not really, it's like, I'm just trying to put my finger on it. I'm just going to keep circling the drain, emotionally circling the drain about some stuff here. And I say that because the moon and also Mercury have sesqui-squares, and that is an aspect that has kind of a scorpionic flavor to them. And now when we have 4:49 a.m. moon in Sagittarius sesqui-square Jupiter in Cancer, I think that there's just maybe some sort of issue with do I stay or do I go? Freedom versus comfort, and how can I reconcile these things? And I can't, that sort of feeling. It's pretty early in the morning. It's going to pass, so try not to stress too much. At 11 a.m., we're going to get the moon square Venus in Virgo, which definitely has to do with Venus in Virgo is fine detail. Moon in Sag is not fine detail. He's the whole forest, not the trees, right? This is very much big picture thinking. And that square, we need to be malleable, changeable, right? And there could be some sort of, we need to change something emotionally about, our value or the self-criticism or just criticism that we have. Moon square Venus in general can also say that we kind of overindulge in some sort of way, like some sort of pleasure that isn't necessarily to our good, and maybe it's we were really trying to over perfect, some stuff we were trying to maybe there's an overcorrection that happens here that just doesn't really quite work right. Moon sesqui square retrograde Chiron in Aries at 12:23 p.m. Again, this is like a lot of psychological sensitivity and just feeling really, really like tender. I think it's just like we're just little tenderonis on this day. Mercury sesqui square retrograde Uranus in Gemini at 3:39 p.m. It's interesting because Uranus in Gemini is ruled by that Mercury currently in Libra. Mercury in Libra has just entered the path of fire, so she's just spicy. I think it's like how things are being communicated may be a little bit too forceful, a little bit too spicy, a little bit too strong. Like it's almost like that person who tells you too much. And you like, I don't need all that information, but they like really, really need to like be in conversation with you. But that sesqui square, it's like sudden shocking conversations that don't feel good. That could be very argumentative. It could just feel like the sorts of information that you're getting is not great. Be careful about what comes out of your mouth at this time. It could be potentially like super destabilizing to the other person or the other persons that you're speaking to, I think. We're going to get 10:05 p.m. Mars in Scorpio biquintile retrograde Saturn in Pisces. This biquintile is very like, can get stuff done. Certainly psychologically done, Scorpio and Pisces. But like Mars and Saturn in aspect usually is like, that's the taskmaster. I have energy to get stuff done. I have the discipline to get things done. And I go forward in such of a way that I'm like very organized inside of my discipline and action. And so there's like, because the quintile is known as like something, it's like talent, innate talent. You don't even have to think about it, right? And so I think about like Mars, Saturn contacts that are beneficial or like good for all intensive purposes is very much like the, it could be like the general that has the plan and implements the plan perfectly. It could be like the surgeon who knows exactly the perfect number of like sutures, to do. It's like, I have the plan, I made it perfect, I got it done. It's very like, yeah, a little bit of that. We get a very pleasant moon biquintile Jupiter in Cancer at 11:11 p.m. I just feel like this feels generous and open and, I don't know, there's a generosity here, which I really, really enjoy, and I think is lovely as well. And then we get a semi-square from the moon to retrograde Pluto, so it's almost as if something comes up late night, but like try not to let it get to you. It's because it's not gonna fully form, so just kind of like shoo it out of your mind and out of your heart. Sunday, September 28th is the sun's day. Sun is in Libra, still very early degrees. We just went through the equinox. And so, yeah, I think we're in obviously the sun in Libra is about sociability and relating and, being in conversation with. Mercury is also in Libra, kind of co-present with that sun. And so I think that really speaks to the being in conversation and being in connection and relating to others. Today, good news, bad news bears. Not a lot of aspects that are Ptolemaic, but also there's some anxious stuff going on. We do have 12:02 a.m. Venus in Virgo, sesqui square retrograde Chiron. Some astrologers posit that Chiron is actually the most at home in Virgo, and that In fact, Virgo is ruled by Chiron if Chiron was a planet. I don't really know how I think about all of that, but I do think that Venus in Virgo being an aspect to retrograde Chiron really speaks to something about healing, maybe healing something around like the feminine yin principle inside of that like masculine principle, the Chiron and Aries stuff, right? There's like wounds of identity and like what is male and what is not. And I just think that that sesqui square can feel very frustrating, but it's like in that grinding and trying to find the way through your sensitivity, through the pain, through the hurt, we end up on the other side on another day, getting to a better place. We're going to have the moon in Sag, sextile Mercury in Libra at 12:43 a.m. Obviously, we're probably all asleep or we're still partying. And if you're still partying, what a lovely little aspect to have. Moon in Sag, sextile Mercury in Libra is like chatty and social and kind of the life of the party, right? I feel like it's, doing a beer bong and smashing the cup on your head and making friends in the bathroom and going on an adventure. It's a fun little playful sextile. It's too bad it's in the middle of the night, but I'm sure some people will catch it and it'll be really cute. Moon semi-square Mars in Scorpio. Something's kind of coming up. Something's trying to form psychologically. It's like a little bit of an anxiety, but not quite enough to call it a full-blown anxiety. It's like a tap on the shoulder. You look, you're like, but was something even there? 11:21 a.m. We have Moon in Sagittarius, quincunx Jupiter in Cancer. Fascinating because there is a mutual reception here, because the moon in Sag is ruled by the Jupiter in Cancer, and the Jupiter in Cancer is ruled by the moon in Sagittarius, but they don't see each other. There's like an aversion. But there is a mutual reception in terms of the signs, right? It's an emotional adjustment. Maybe it's like an emotional adjustment in how we hope about things. Maybe there's some sort of shift in consciousness, emotional consciousness, how we want to go forward. It could feel a little bit anxious, but we're able, I think because of that mutual reception, we're able to make that adjustment, but it could feel kind of sudden. At 6:23 p.m., we get the moon trine retrograde Chiron in Aries. This is a fire trine. It's passionate. It's healing. It's intuitive. I think it's also, there's a bit of generosity here in like how we are working with our healing in that moment. So when we had that sesqui square with Venus and retrograde Chiron, it's like we're working on it, and then we're able to kind of psychologically and emotionally integrate that with the trine to retrograde Chiron in Aries later in the evening. Now, at 10:43 p.m., the moon does square retrograde Saturn in Pisces. And I think this square has everything to do with faith and belief, right? Sagittarius and Pisces really have to do with belief systems, faith, and compassion, and fairness and things like that. And so when we get the moon in hard aspect to Saturn, it usually means a bit of like a wah-wah. There's a reality check here, Saturn being the planet of reality. And reality is a little murky right now. We have Saturn in a water sign, a mutable water sign. So there isn't like a lot of firmness. It's like gelatinous. The moon square retrograde Saturn in Pisces really speaks to some sort of shift. And I also think that I think it's a third quarter. Yeah, it's a third quarter square. So there's a crisis of consciousness here. Like, I need to get this done, but I feel kind of depressed. The moon square Saturn can feel like a depression, right? Where there's a limit. We've been limited upon. We've been pressed upon some sort of responsibility, maybe some sort of responsibility for taking steps to be compassionate for other people. And like that might feel very overwhelming. There's a sense of being and feeling a bit stuck. Not a really great aspect for the end of the day, but it's also kind of like, oh man, I have all of these tasks on my shoulders to get done tomorrow, which is Monday. So it kind of almost says you're going to bed with a case of the Mondays on Sunday night. Monday, September 29th is the moon's day. The moon has shifted into Capricorn today at 2:54 a.m. The moon is in the sign of her detriment, or of their detriment, not to gender the planets, though I'm not always good at that, so pardon. So moon enters a sign that is ruled by Saturn. So there can be, block, limit, business-oriented, ambitious moon, getting things done. It's a taskmaster moon, fuck it, I'll do it myself. There's a bit of seriousness too, and considering that there was a square between Moon and Saturn just the night before, she's feeling like she's got a lot of tasks to get done and got to go and get it done. A business-minded moon. Got to take care of your business. Now at 4:05 a.m. we get the moon square retrograde Neptune. This can feel kind of disillusioned. This can feel kind of like, I think it's almost like feeling spiritually taken advantage of, feeling confused. Why am I here? What am I supposed to do? Maybe confused about the things that you're trying to achieve, right? You want to do something about it, but you can't because there's just confusion. And in some ways, I kind of consider this moon, at least in the morning, a bit besieged, though we don't necessarily consider aspects to the transpersonal planets, Neptune and Pluto, to be besieging planets, but I do. I think that these planets can and will besiege you. And so I think that with the moon just entering Capricorn, we get this great feeling of pressure and responsibility to get things done, feeling kind of blue, and then also feeling really confused about how to get any of it done. Moon being in between the square to Saturn and applying to the square to Neptune. Hopefully, we will kind of get through that and it won't hold on for too long of the day. Now, at 5:22 a.m., we're going to get the moon quincunx retrograde Uranus in Gemini, and this can be, having to suddenly make some sort of shift around, information that comes forward and, the sorts of work we're trying to get done, right? So it's like with what has just been presented to me, now I need to adjust, right? And I think that the moon in Capricorn has every ability to be able to do so, but it could feel kind of sudden, kind of shocking, that sort of thing. And hopefully not too anxiety producing, but I think it's pretty anxiety producing. And even just kind of crisis feeling, I would think, is probably that, because it is because of the nature of the type of quincunx it is. Anyways, I digress. Moon sextile Mars in Scorpio at 12:55 p.m. This is such an interesting sextile to me. I really think that this is a great working sextile to get stuff done, right? The moon is in Mars's sign of exaltation. And, Mars is in the sign of the moon's fall, but there is a working energy here that says, yeah, I know what I got to do, and now I got to go get it done, right? So kind of use that energy to take you through the rest of your day. We're going to get the first quarter square of the moon in Capricorn to the sun in Libra, right? So this is known as according to Dan Ruggiero, the crisis of awareness. We are aware of something. We're made aware of something that we need to, probably psychologically integrate, emotionally integrate. We have the planets in more of the social signs, so I think that there's something about that. I think that we are very aware of it's almost like time. The time we have to get things done, and it feels a bit like a crisis. And the moon just kind of went through it with these other aspects, right? And so it's like, okay, time's a ticking. I gotta fix it. I gotta do the things that I gotta do. Squares have the nature of Mars. So, and it's a cardinal square. So it's really like, I gotta get this done. We are going to get a kind of genius little biquintile from the moon to retrograde Uranus in Gemini. And that's going to happen at 5:09 p.m. And I think this just really kind of lends us a like fresh perspective or emotional perspective on how we want to go get that done, whatever those things are in our life. And things that we certainly started at that new moon. So this could have to do with what was going on at the new moon, which was a eclipse. We are still not out of eclipse season. We're getting closer. We're getting there. We have about a week left, but like now we're needing to take some action perhaps somewhere. And I think that's the last aspect of the day that I want to speak about. Yeah, and that's Monday. Tuesday, September 30th is Mars's day. Mars is finally free of that square within 3 degrees to Pluto. And so I'm hoping that we, by this Tuesday, are kind of feeling like things have let off the gas just a little bit, right? We do have some good working aspects to get some things done today. And Mars, remember, Mars's day, get things done day. Right? Take some sort of action sort of day. We get the moon in Capricorn, trine Venus in Virgo. This is like the morning aspect, 5:20 a.m. I mean, really, it's a great aspect to get things done. Take care of business, to, organize and clean and kind of get down to the brass tacks of things. And really, this feels like a real business-like trine. Moon is in the sign of the business person and Venus is in the sign of the merchant. Like, you cannot make a better trine say like, all right, take care of your business today. 9:48 a.m. we're going to get the moon quintile retrograde Saturn in Pisces. I think there's a bit of like resolve. There's this like kind of undercurrent of emotional stability, and, really supported by that trine from the moon to Venus earlier in the morning. And then at 1:38 p.m., we're going to get the moon in Capricorn, quintile Mars in Scorpio. Also, I think this is a very supportive aspect. It's a quintile, it's not Ptolemaic, but this is really like, I'm going to go get this done, and I have what I need to get things done, right? Mars is in Scorpio. It's got the resources to get the things done. Both in yin signs, so maybe this is just, it's not so externally kind of expressive, but it's like this way of moving that is very kind of almost self-possessed and also knows exactly what to do. We're going to get a quintile from the moon to retrograde Neptune in Aries. This is also, I think, kind of helping us just move forward in the ways that we have dreamed of, and being kind of a little bit of a visionary in terms of like the ways that we want to take action. It's a lovely little quintile as well. 8:38 p.m. I would say like once we start getting into that 6 p.m. time, we're going to want to be a little cautious with how we're communicating perhaps, because we are going to get the moon in Capricorn square Mercury in Libra. So, moon square Mercury can be, some sort of verbal outburst or confrontation or fight even. Spicy square is the nature of Mars. So spicy, needing to take some sort of action, this both in social signs, so it could be the moon in Capricorn really wants to play it by the rules, but Mercury in Libra kind of wants to play it on both sides, and that doesn't really bode well. But they're both in cardinal signs, so it's also about taking some sort of action, and maybe it doesn't feel very good. At 10:40 p.m., we get the moon in Capricorn opposite Jupiter in Cancer, and this, try not to overdo it. Try not to overdo it in trying to get things done or to achieve something, because there just seems to be some sort of extraness that isn't quite great. There's an indulgence in, kind of the moon and Capricorn ways of doing things, like, fuck it, I'll do it myself. And that Jupiter opposition is just kind of, I don't know, kind of feeding that in not necessarily the healthiest of ways. And yeah, just try not to overdo it. Try not to expand your emotional boundaries so big that you can't come back from it, especially if you had some sort of verbal, confrontation with someone where you're like, and this is what I think, and these are my boundaries, and this is where I'm at, and that is that, because it could be something that you might not necessarily be able to walk yourself back from. And that's Tuesday.
Hey, thank you for listening to today's Astro Weather with me. I'm Sydney. As a reminder, I'm always open to seeing both new and my beloved returning clients. My website is ddastrology.com, that is D as in dog, astrology.com, to check me out and just click the email buttons in order to schedule with me. If you're into a more conversational feel with your podcast and content, I have a podcast called BS Astrology with my fellow Mercurial Mommy Bender, and we put out episodes every Sunday for the week. Just search BS Astrology on YouTube or wherever you enjoy listening to your podcasts, including Spotify, Audible, and more. Have a good day.